In the year 2022, we're talking about the phenomenon of A Song of Ice and Fire, George R.R. Martin's corpus of written work as a whole, in three very separate categories, one of which may remain open-ended for centuries to come. Okay. One category is the book as it was first planned and first written. Okay. So version one of A Song of Ice and Fire, Game of Thrones, etc. Okay. This is not lost without a trace. To some extent, version one of the story that George was writing, it is still implicit in, inherent in the text of A Game of Thrones. You could argue the first couple of books, first couple short stories connected to the same universe also, right? These vestiges of the earlier plan, the earlier version of what the book is supposed to be. And we have a lot of documentary evidence of earlier drafts that have leaked, the initial proposal that he sent to the publishers outlining what the books were going to be when it was planned to be just a trilogy, a much shorter series of books, much more concise storyline. Okay, so this is one category. Another category is the commercialized adaptation of A Game of Thrones, of the new spin-off HBO is promoting in the year 2022, of perhaps many more spin-offs to come. Many of you are aware of the kind of legal details of the deal with the devil, frankly, George R.R. Martin made with HBO. That's why he was in no position to negotiate, no position to change anything, as the first TV adaptation progressively got worse and worse and worse over a period of at least 8 years. I think it was more like 9 years if you measure it month to month, beginning to, if you go from the pilot episode to that terrible conclusion of the final season of the TV show, so it's a long time. And if he had a different deal with a different filmmaking outfit, whatever you want to say, if it had been adapted for cinema, if some other situation with some other network broadcaster, what have you, possibly he could have changed the showrunners, could have changed the director, could have negotiated a new direction at some point. Well, that was not his situation at all, and it is not his situation at all now, and it's not going to be a situation in the future, and that goes on and on. And then the third category is the question of what remains to be written, what remains to be disclosed in the books themselves. I don't want to estimate the body weight of George R.R. Martin. I don't want to estimate the state of his circulatory system, his cardiovascular health. It is a very real possibility that we will never see the conclusion and writing of his books, that we will be left for centuries to come to wonder what the books would have been, should have been, could have been if he had finished writing them, right? And obviously right now, last few days of 2021, and as the year 2022 unfolds, obviously that is an area of speculation. And these three things are linked, right? Our appreciation of the books as they exist and of the conclusion of the books that's yet to be written or yet to be revealed, yet to be published, all right? Our understanding of that is inextricable from our understanding and analysis of the pop culture phenomenon of the adaptation and exploitation of it by HBO Corporation, making of television shows, video games, collectible figurines, board games, trading cards. I mean, I know they're interwoven. Each is interlinked with the other. You think George himself isn't influenced by it? He is. It's not just the audience that's influenced by it. I don't know if you've seen it. There's film footage of George. He has his own collection of the figurines, holding up the figurines based on the characters in his show, and he's aware of the differences between the different versions of them and so on. He's wrapped up in it too. And yeah, both of those categories, our understanding and analysis of them, it's inextricably, indissolubly linked to the notion originally of what the books were supposed to be. Version 0, draft 0. As I say, it's still there in Game of Thrones, the first volume of the text, and it's still there in the proposal that was sent to the publisher, so on and so forth. Okay. So what is the political philosophy of George R.R. Martin? And I'm not going to ask you why does it matter. I'm going to assert that if there weren't a political philosophy at the center of this cultural phenomenon, it would be of no interest at all. It would be of no significance at all. Now, George R.R. Martin has written many short stories and novels outside of the Game of Thrones universe. Some consist of George R.R. Martin reflecting on and regretting the breakup of his first marriage. There's nothing wrong with that. It's a perfectly meaningful form of literature, and I'm sure some people really care about those stories he wrote. Some of them seem to be him reflecting on how awful it is to be, a 400-pound creepy man. Like, really, there are some that are kind of talking about his obesity and his body image issues. There's nothing wrong with that. You can write a story, you can write a story about what it's like to be, so overweight and so on and so forth. All right. The stories he wrote, the books he created that had no political philosophy within them, all right, I've got to tell you something. They are never going to matter in the history of the world the way A Song of Ice and Fire, Game of Thrones, etc., the way this phenomenon already has mattered, and I believe the way it will continue to matter. It could matter much more in the future. Now, I said this in a video a little over 2 years ago, but I'll just say it again. If you think the political ideas in Game of Thrones are slightly provocative, slightly interesting from a Western democratic perspective, how do you think they translate into Arabic? It is translated in Arabic. It is being read in Arabic. It is the movies and TV shows, etc. The video games, they're all being seen in the Arabic-speaking world. How do you think this translates into Chinese? What are the impacts for Chinese culture, civilization, the meditation on the past, present, and future of democracy and of feudalism and of dictatorship and all of these themes. So yeah, it matters. It already has mattered for more than 10 years. It's reasonable to suppose it's going to matter more in future. And let me ask you to reflect. If there were no political philosophy in the books or the TV show, the A Song of Ice and Fire phenomenon, if it were just a series of romances, if this were just about the question of who Jaime Lannister is going to fall in love with next, will Jaime Lannister, end up happily ever after? If George R.R. Martin were writing a kind of Jane Austen romantic literature here, would any of you care? And again, you may not consciously think you chose these books, or you care about these books, or you chose the TV show or care about the TV show for expressly political reasons. But I'm making the assertion here that the reason why this is so much more interesting and so much more significant than 10,000 other movies that feature dragons and knights riding on horseback. I mean, do you want to look at the list? I mean, you want to look at the list? The recycling of these tropes. Most of them go back to actually French and German fables for children. Some of it, yes, fine, King Arthur. Some of it goes back to English tradition. But actually, I think this stuff is more French and German than people want to admit it is themselves. But in any case, kind of Western European fables about the Dark Ages, for want of a better term. Okay. Even now, so here we are, 2022. Do you really care what happens next in Jaime Lannister's sex life? I have some curiosity, I admit, but that's not for me what makes it compelling, what makes me look forward to it. And I don't think in the long term, reflecting on it, that's what's going to matter, or why this cultural phenomenon matters so much. Now, George R.R. Martin's political and religious philosophy has been consistent for decades. He has been fascinated by the idea that human beings could achieve immortality through what is called in science fiction writing a hive mind. If you don't know the term hive mind, what does it mean? Why does it matter? Well, the idea that somehow the open-ended process of evolution might result in some species somewhere, if not on planet Earth, on some other planet, some species gaining the ability to pool together the memories and experiences of all the members of that species. And in this way, by depositing your consciousness, by downloading your consciousness into this so-called hive mind, into this shared consciousness, that we would achieve immortality. Now, let's just pause and reflect. Does that sound like an interesting idea to you? Because it really doesn't to me. It's really not very interesting. Oh, hey, there's this alien planet where the whole species, they eat with separate mouths, but then they digest and poo with the same stomach organ. Like, wouldn't that be a fascinating idea? A species where the esophaguses of all the species somehow mystically merge together so that when one member of the species eats, they all eat. That's really not interesting to me at all. I do think of the brain as a biological organ in your body. I think that, consciousness in the absence of a brain is just as ridiculous as talking about, digestion in the absence of entrails. What is digestion? Digestion isn't one thing. It's a whole bunch of chemicals and conditions and structures coming together and working in a kind of, synergy. There's stomach acid involved, and there's the long intestine and the small intestine. Yeah, you put it all together, and that's the process of digestion. Well, yeah, you put all this stuff together, and you have the process of mentation. And it's not so different for a monkey, and it's not so different for a dolphin. It's not so different for a cow. It's not, But the idea that this can be merged and that would be tremendously meaningful or matter, I think that's a very shallow, very silly, childlike delusion. Now, I'm going to talk in a minute about George R. R. Martin's work outside of A Song of Ice and Fire. Stories like A Song for Leah and so on. The original plan, version 1 or version 0 of A Song of Ice and Fire, Game of Thrones, if you're aware of this recurring theme that George R. R. Martin has written about 4 decades prior to and leading up to Game of Thrones, the original plan can be summarized very simply, and it was a much simpler work with 3 volumes. It was a simpler storyline. Okay, there is a magical boy born with innate superpowers in a castle, right? And he goes on a mystical, visionary quest to discover or rediscover that his ancient ancestors, or some of them, had this better way of life because they had a hive mind. Right? Then this hive mind thing has come up in slightly different forms in one George R. R. Martin story after another, one novel after another. So it's not that surprising. He goes up to the far north beyond the wall. Yes, in the context of this war, blah, 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 a civil war, I suppose you could say, that's going on. But he and his mother, originally, it was the injured boy and his mother escaped north of the wall, very closely parallel to the structure of the Dune novels, where the mother and son escape out into the desert, and then he goes on a magical, mystical vision quest and discovers his superpowers and discovers that he's the Messiah-like anointed magical leader of the next phase of a civilization. So the first book, there are actually many, many palpable borrowings from Dune, how else to put it, including, throughout the books, you can find specific sentences, specific lines of text that are quoting or cribbing from Dune. So Dune was a significant influence on George R. R. Martin. But whereas in Dune, the spiritual discovery is a hallucinogenic drug, spice, as it's called now. And that spice connects to, is it even worth summarizing the spirituality and supernatural elements of Dune? But, the author of Dune was interested in the idea that, like, our genetic code carries the memories of events from many centuries earlier, that you can remember things from the distant past. Again, to what extent this is mystical or biological. So you had a different set of thematic fascinations that, by the way, connected to a very different set of political tropes and concerns. T-Man in the audience says, I was going to say that Game of Thrones is the Dune of the fantasy world. Yeah. Well, there's a real cause and effect relationship between them. And anyway, sorry, I could digress here. You may or may not know this, T-Man, but George R. R. Martin wrote one particular short story that very much influenced the third Star Wars movie. It influenced the planet of the Ewoks and also the initial invention of Chewbacca. So the original plan for the Star Wars movies was that they would travel to Chewbacca's homeworld. Sorry, it's the planet of the Wookiees, whatever the hell it's called. Maybe Wookiestan. And the tropes from this one particular story by George R.R. Martin, 7 Times Never Kill Man, that was what that was adapted from, including there were several particular illustrations of the furry characters with carrying guns and a gun belt over their shoulder. And they are exactly what Chewbacca was based on. Now, I assume it's because people got tired of hearing the moaning noise Chewbacca made. And if you haven't seen the Star Wars Christmas special, you are missing out. Jeez, that's a whole crowded room full of Chewbacca-like characters, Wookiees, members, all moaning at each other. Well, yeah, believe it or not, all of that whole boondoggle. So anyway, the plan was adapted, and instead they go to this other planet called Endor, which is covered by the Ewoks, not by the Wookiees. But believe it or not, this whole thing is derivative of a particular story by George R.R. Martin. So, that intersected with his life. I mean, having your ideas influence a massive cultural event like the initial Star Wars trilogy or something. I just say someone like George R.R. Martin had many different opportunities to develop a different fascination or a different direction. It is interesting that as an old man, sorry, because no offense, but it wasn't as a young man that he got into writing these works that are really based on Dune. It's as an old man that he's going back to Dune, a book that had been famous and influential in his youth. So I would presume that in the years leading up to, or maybe the months leading up to writing the first Game of Thrones book, he went back and reread Dune, that he looked at it again, and for one way or another got inspired about it again. Because I wouldn't say, if you look at his career as a whole, if you look at what he wrote before Game of Thrones, nobody would say that he was derivative of Dune, like in general, over his whole career. But definitely, Game of Thrones and the beginning of the A Song of Ice and Fire phenomenon, it is very, very directly a derivative of and inspired by Dune. The Dune books, not the Dune movies, I should say. Okay, so version 0 of the text, which is to some extent still extant in the text, to some extent we know it from the proposal to the publishing company, etc., the outline of what the text is going to be. This was a story of a boy who discovers or rediscovers that there was this ancient prehistoric culture that had a magical hive mind, had the ability to magically merge together people's consciousness so they share each other's thoughts, and that this provided people with a real and palpable form of immortality. There was a sense in which you would never die because your memories would be shared by other people, your experiences would be shared with other people, as opposed to disappearing. So this fantasy appears in George R.R. Martin's writing again and again and again. And very often, as in the story A Song for Leah, the Song for Leah is the most narrowly focused on just this one issue. If you don't find this one fantasy interesting, you'll find that story completely boring because that's all it's about. A Song for Leah is holding up this idea of a biologically real immortality achieved through a science fiction hive mind, achieved through sharing consciousness, etc. It's holding it up and contrasting it to the promises made by religion in the real world, religion like Catholicism or religion like Islam, that they just tell you to pray and you're going to have immortality after you die. I could say a few other things. I guess it might be interesting to note that A Song for Leah talks about other types of happiness that come from this hive mind joint consciousness experience that, interestingly, Game of Thrones does not. Game of Thrones, A Song of Ice and Fire, etc. It very much deals with sex. It deals with isolation and loneliness. It deals with happiness, sensuality, like kind of what is the meaning of happiness. And then once you know this mystical happiness of being merged into, the conjoined memories and experiences of others of what significance is your own happiness. Now, admittedly, it's just at the end of the extant books as we have them, the books that have already been published as of this date, December 2021. At the very end of this, the text we have to work from, Bran, he is already becoming acclimatized to the hive mind. but it doesn't satisfy him in this way. This is a big contrast to A Song for Leah. And I think, again, we could talk about many of the other books, including Seven Times Never Kill Man. Seven Times Never Kill Man is a meditation on the same issues from a different angle. You could make a list of the books and short stories of George R.R. Martin's and ask yourself which ones do and which ones don't deal with the hive mind. Many of the science fiction stories involve this one way or another, sometimes even if it's just negatively. Sometimes if it's just talking about, for example, the problem of overpopulation and selfishness because of the absence of a hive mind. Things to deal with from different perspectives. Anyway, I know we don't have that many chapters showing you Brand's perspective on the world after he's been merged into this business of shared memories and this kind of immortality that's been offered him. But he's not happy. It's not as though Brand's perspective is that, oh, now he would never want to go back to the real world, that he would never want to walk on 2 feet again, that he would never want to just be selfishly interested in his own sex life or having his own children. Or on the contrary, we see a very frustrated, and this is also a contrast between the book and the TV show. The TV show didn't deal with any of this stuff. We see a frustrated and miserable, crippled boy who still very much wishes he could be a knight and wishes he could have sex or have a romance or love affair with someone. He very much still wants all of the things that a normal individual human being wants. And it seems that having access to the memories of 1,000 years or what have you, being able to see the world with 1,000 eyes and one, as the book repeatedly gives us this phrase, that no, this actually doesn't satisfy him in any way whatsoever. It doesn't have this euphoric or overwhelming or life-altering or life-ending significance that it does in A Song for Leah. Now, why am I taking the time to say this? Well, remember, one part of what we're discussing or analyzing here are books and stories that have not yet been written, and they may never be written. I would encourage George R.R. Martin to get on a vegan diet immediately and lower his chances of having a heart attack by about 70%. But George R.R. Martin may never live long enough to conclude this tale. It is certainly possible, based on the text as we now have it, that unlike the story A Song for Leah, that Bran will rebel against the hive mind, that he will rebel against and discard this idea of the collocation of memories, shall we say, of people's memories being merged together. It's possible he will decide that no, what's really worth living in life is life as an individual. That's possible. If so, it's a remarkable contrast to what every other story George R.R. Martin has ever written has to say about this matter. It is not an exaggeration to say that a large part of his perspective on religion is that what religion is offering humanity is the tempting, intoxicating promise of a hive mind and of immortality of exactly this kind that it never can deliver on, that this is some kind of fundamental yearning we have as human beings, perhaps because our own evolution, our own biology is leading toward that conclusion millions of years in the future, or on some other planet or what have you, that's the kind of endpoint we want, the teleological goal we want to work towards biologically, sentimentally, or however you want to put it, that this is the fundamental human yearning. And then to achieve that is, kind of totally and ultimately satisfying. Now, I'm describing this so far in a somewhat flattering way. I've already let you guys know I think it's complete nonsense. I mean, I no more want to mentate your memories than I want to digest your food. You know what I mean? I don't want to excrete what you eat. It doesn't make sense to me. The idea of merging the function of of one brain with another is not any more mysterious or inspirational or interesting to me than the idea of merging one stomach with another. I'm a nihilist. In this context, I'm a kind of biological nihilist. And I would say further, look at the monkeys of the forest, creatures that are not so different from us. Look at the squawking penguins of Antarctica. Do you think, how much better their lives would be if all of them could squawk in unison? If each penguin could access the memory of 1,000 years of what 1,000 other penguins had done, instead of living in this terrible state of isolation? No. I mean, whatever is meaningful in the life of a penguin is irreducibly and ineluctably and uniquely individual. This is my experience, whether I'm a monkey in the jungle or a penguin on a sheet of ice in Antarctica. And I wouldn't even suppose that any one penguin would be particularly interested in the memories of other penguins from 1,000 years earlier. Yeah. Well, that's what those guys did with their lives. But what I'm interested in, what I'm consumed with, is what I do with mine. Whether my experience hunting fish, or my experience laying an egg, or finding a mate, or all the things that penguins, consume within their incredibly limited intellectual capacity. But why would your ideal be of a perfectly harmonious, hive-minded penguin society where they all quack in unison instead of each quacking at the other? What's the point? I think this is a really stupid and childish misinterpretation, not just of human nature, but of nature with a capital letter N. And again, whatever joy and misery there is in being a monkey, whatever may be meaningful in the life of a monkey, which I will readily admit is largely meaningless, still, this can't be separated from the individuality of the monkey, and his memories serve his purpose as my memories serve mine. My memories are tools for me to make use of. And I totally reject this notion that somehow by sharing the tool, we'd be transforming our lives or the meaning of them, or what is to be done. And again, even this, all of you had grandparents. Not all of you knew your grandparents. How interested were you in your grandparents' experiences? How much time did you spend asking your grandparents about their memories and their lives? Do you even care now? Do you want to, after this live stream is over, call your grandmother up and say, hey, share with me your memories and experiences? Most of us don't care. And, what did your grandparents do with their life? Well, they sure sat around playing cards a lot. The memories of so many hands of poker, of so many games of pinochle. I'm sorry, but, I think what it is George R.R. Martin is choosing to romanticize, I think, is kind of tragically misguided. Now, you guys may remember, it's another real science fiction, science fiction source material that may have haunted you for the rest of your life. There is a moment in the original Blade Runner film toward the end where the antagonist is going to die, and he regrets. And it's the first time I saw it, it was tremendously emotionally moving to me. I forget if I was 11 years old or 16 years old. I was a much younger man. I was a child or what have you. But the villain, the antagonist, is dying, and he says the words he is regretting. He's reflecting that all of his memories, the memories of all these amazing things he has done, they will now dissolve and disappear forever, like tears in the rain. Like teardrops joining the rain that runs down his face. They'll disappear forever. And yes, that can seem very moving. When my own father died, I remember just kind of reflecting how remarkable it was, because my father was an expert in a number of kind of technical fields. He knew a lot about how to set up the lighting in art galleries, for example. He worked in art galleries and museums. Wow, there was this whole, it was kind of a century worth of expertise, and experience within this technical field that was accessible the day before yesterday, and now is irretrievably lost forever. Now, just a few days ago, you could have asked this guy a question within this, the history of museums and how to plan and build museums. That was his area of expertise, and he could have instantly and effortlessly told you the answer. And today, at no price and with no effort, I understand there's this sentimental sense of what is lost. But, for myself as a mature adult, I want to completely unsentimentally, assert to you that no, thoughts in your head, they exist in space, just like a discarded can of Coke on the sidewalk. Like these are things, they come and go. You make use of them. And when you're dead, they're gone, and they're of no use to you, and they're of no use to anyone else anymore. And, you may cherish your memories, but I think even that is a mistake. I think it's a mistake George R.R. Martin in his private life is guilty of, just based on his writing, based on his sentimentality, as I know it. If you want to be understood, if you want your memories and experiences to matter to someone else, you have to put in the level of effort equal to creating a work of art. Now, some of you, if you have a grandfather who lived through World War II, you are probably not that interested in hearing him say casually and drunkenly meander through a bunch of reflections about what happened in World War II. You may have had this experience. Ask your grandfather, hey, what did you do in World War II? And you just get a bunch of sneering, aimless, sarcastic remarks and reflections. Okay, so that's memory. You know what I mean? Your grandfather would have to put in effort, even if it's not recorded and it's not written for a book. He would have to put in the effort to gather his thoughts and organize them and present you with a kind of work of art. It could be a podcast. It could be a YouTube video. Obviously, he could write a memoir. He could write a book or something. But that actually, if we want other people to understand our memories, if we want them to be able to make use of our memories, if we want them to even be interested or curious about our memories, that requires art. All right. And what's significant in life is not actually sharing your memories or sharing your consciousness or having a hive mind. What's significant is sharing works of art. That's actually is the production and work and labor, and to understand how unnatural that is. That's not something biological. This is something contrary to and outside of nature, evolution, and all of the science fiction and religious tropes that he brings into. So Niles Venstrom says, homie, make deep dive videos on A Song of Ice and Fire, or at least your perspective on it. It's new to us. Well, if you check the playlist, Niles, you may already know, but I think this is going to be the 24th video in that playlist. So you already have many, many hours to listen to of me talking about Game of Thrones. But, a really sort of saddening question to think about is, how much am I going to care when the next book finally comes out? 5 years ago, I would have been so thrilled to see a new Game of Thrones book. I would have been so thrilled to even have a new TV show or film adaptation. But today, today, all of our expectations have been very much dimmed and diminished. So someone in the audience knew the name of Chewbacca's homeworld. So it was not, in fact, Wookieestan. It was not Wookonia. It was not the Republic of Wook. Trademark it now. Republic of Wook. Come on. The Wook Republic. So yeah, T-Man comments, quote, I have always thought of the hive mind as an a-religious philosophy. Christian, I wonder if that's a typo or if you mean that. So he said an a-religious philosophy. Christian writers like C.S. Lewis, Wendell Berry, and Kierkegaard are conspicuously anti-hive mind. Yeah, okay, well, there's a lot in that comment. That's an interesting set of reflections there, T-Man. Or perhaps you should pronounce it Taman. Taman, sounds more fun. In some of George R.R. Martin's stories, it's completely explicit that the concept is being used to demolish religion. It is being used as part of a very harsh critique of and attack on religion. I do not think you could say that about A Song of Ice and Fire yet. It's not there yet. It's just not. I mean, it's absolutely. You can put together all the different comments about religion in the books, but no doubt, as I say, version 0 of the text. What was happening there? Where was it coming from? Where was it going? Well, again, Bran goes to the mysterious woods in the north, discovers this remnant of a more ancient people whose lives were intertwined with the first men, who are very closely parallel to First Nations, indigenous people in this. So the last remainder of the indigenous people, the last remainder of the so-called children of the forest, and children of the forest itself is also an allusion to First Nations, who were referred to that way in French by French colonists in what's now Quebec, pretty far north in Canada, and so on. Anyway, these are presumed cultural allusions. I assume he is not alluding to the indigenous people of northern Laos, which is also possible. But anyway, that's a very simple, linear, demonstrative plot development. And then he returns, presumably, I mean, again, that's already happened in the TV show. He returns to, in some sense, rule or control Westeros. Now, you tell me, does anyone believe that in the books it ends with Bran being the king in King's Landing? I think most people, at least as the books exist now on paper, seems wildly improbable. It's possible that was the idea in version 0, was that Bran would triumphantly return Again, if it's closely modeled on Dune, then that would follow the pattern of Dune. Again, exile in the desert, spiritual awakening, and then the guy becomes a sort of great revolutionary political leader when he returns. It's not impossible. That was the original plan for the book. So that it's an idea that's still, um, you know, that George R.R. Martin is still playing with. But I think most people, anyway, today it seems very, very hard to see that the final conclusion to the plot is going to be Bran Stark, King of Westeros. And indeed, ultimately, what would that mean philosophically? What would that mean politically? Well, again, if it's a 100% unironic extension of the same set of tropes that George R.R. Martin has been obsessed with throughout his whole career, it will just be a reflection on the superiority of this hive mind form of organization, that what's really superior is being able to access the memories of people from centuries ago and to have this immortality provided to you through the merging of individual consciousness. Well, okay. It could be that is where the text is going, and that's where it always initially was going. If so, then really you're in a situation where the red god, the god of fire, is fighting against this hive-minded god, and you have a situation where one religion is the true religion and the other is false, like globally for Westeros and Essos combined. And that's the moral of the story, is that this is a combat between a real monotheistic religion, that's a true theos, as a true god, a true magical power behind it, that R'hllor, whatever you want to say, the red religion in this fictional world. And then on the other hand, you have, whether you want to call it the blue religion or what have you, but the religion north of the wall, which is based on a true supernatural hive mind. And the thesis is just that hive mind offers a better future for humanity, and that in the distant past, it offered some kind of lost utopia, some kind of wonderful world for the children of the forest. That was a better way to have an intelligent society. It's possible it's just that dumb. And that's possible. That's why none of the other political ideas really make any sense or are going anywhere. Now, it's possible also there is some material about democracy in the books as they're already extant. So the books that have been published and some of the isolated chapters of the next book have been published. So I'm treating all that as what's already known, what's already been published or distributed on the internet. We do get Tyrion and a few other witnesses reflecting upon how different the democracies of the exotic East are from feudalism in Westeros. It's possible instead a more sophisticated future. Well, again, the books may never be finished. It's possible that Bran goes, witnesses the reality of this hive mind, and rejects it, but rejects also the individualism and selfishness that makes feudalism so horrible in this fictional world. And then he then concludes, there's a middle path, which is democracy. That what you need is not a hive mind, not a science fiction hive mind. I feel like I keep having to insisting this is a science fiction hive mind. I know, as opposed to a biologically real or also if you say hive mind without science fiction, do you guys actually think this is how bees perceive the world? Like, it's such a weird choice. Is this how ants experience reality? No, of course not. It's possible Bran will reject, the collocation of memories and what have you, and will instead say, well, what's really important is that we have this very different kind of cooperation through democracy and political equality, which, again, the book does not hold up as a positive example. It shows Tyrion laughing at and scoffing at flagrantly corrupt elections, all the discussions we get of democracy in the East. And by the way, also, these same, just as with ancient Greece and ancient Rome, democracy is combined with slavery, whereas feudalism excludes slavery. So, Westeros does not have democracy, but they also don't have slavery, whereas Essos, at least some cities in Essos, have both democracy and slavery. So, again, Okay, that would be more sophisticated. Is it more plausible? Does anyone really think that the ultimate point of the Game of Thrones books is to recognize the superiority of Braavosi society? What Westeros needs is to reform to resemble Braavos. Again, the whole structure of the book, especially if you're aware of version 0, it doesn't make sense that way. You could have a totally different book that consists of Bran going into exile in Braavos and deciding Braavos really has a better form of political organization and then returning to Westeros. By the way, you could have that also with, wow, it's been a while since I've been reading and talking about these books. The last of the Targaryens, Daenerys Targaryen. Daenerys Targaryen goes away to live in Essos. Do you think the conclusion of the story is that Daenerys brings the full brutality and barbarism of nomadic, horse-riding peoples back, that she reorganizes the society of Westeros to resemble the society of Essos? This is not plausible. Again, especially if you've read version 0 of the plot. Indeed, in version 0, how much space was even given to Daenerys and her story? How much did she matter? How much would she have been developed if it were only 3 volumes long, following that original plan? I think barely at all. I think there wouldn't be that much space for her to matter as a character in all her meditations about slavery and political leadership, so on and so forth. But I think, anyway, what is the political philosophy of Daenerys Targaryen? It is not the political philosophy of George R.R. Martin. I mean, it's not the point of this book. Now, the TV show, again, TV show handled this in an incredibly clumsy and ultimately boring way. But when Daenerys returns from Essos to Westeros, she doesn't have a better idea of how to organize society. She doesn't have a political agenda. Her agenda is revenge. And if you've read the books, George R.R. Martin is anti-revenge. Part of the whole reason for the Southern conspiracy plot, taking you down to Dorne and so on, is just the critique of revenge, vendettas, etc. So it can't possibly be that the books are going to end with the celebration of revenge. Like, you know what? Democracy, barbarity, feudalism, what really matters is getting revenge on enemies. There is no way that's the conclusion and the point of all these themes and issues and examples that George R. R. Martin has been playing with. Now, it is possible, but in terms of the role Daenerys might play, at this moment, religiously, who does Daenerys work for? Now, in the book, how much philosophy is there that can be separated from religion? Most of the philosophy is tied to religion. Well, the short answer is nobody. She's not working for the Red God, R'hllor. She's not working for the Children of the Forest, or their mysterious leader with 1,000 eyes and one, et cetera, et cetera. She doesn't believe in or support any of the religions. It is possible that in the book, unlike the TV show, that when she arrives in Westeros, she will just literally destroy some or all of the religions. Some of his anti-religious themes could come out there. Well, no, never forget. I know from some of us, we read it such a long time ago, but the initial introduction of the god R'hllor is in the context of both burning statues and burning people, of human sacrifice. The brutality and evil of the religion of R'hllor is really shown to us up front. And the reason we are given for opposing Stannis, which now has become easier and easier to forget as so many books have gone by, the reason we're giving for opposing Stannis is that it will just be unspeakable evil will come from his religious fundamentalism, that his commitment to that religion and what he will do if he takes over power will be terrible. Now, the TV show has spoiled this for us, of course, but presumably we're going to be reminded of how evil Stannis really is and how evil his religion is and that agenda when he sacrifices his own daughter to the gods. This is already, people already predicted that in the books just based on the way it was written, that it was implicitly foreshadowed in the style of writing. But of course, this has actually happened on the TV show. That's a plot twist yet to come. So, yes, there is, in terms of the political philosophy of the books, he's set up quite a number of religions that he opposes explicitly. It is not possible that the conclusion of the books, the political hypothesis and conclusion will be, what people need? People just need to be conquered by the Iron Islands. People just need to convert to the religion of the Iron Islands. That's a good religion. The drowned god. That's, there's, what people really need to do is reform Westeros to get back to the old way of the Iron Islands. And that's a whole long discourse. And there's a kind of cultural critique and anthropology there. What he has to say about the Iron Islands and religion and politics in that context, having set up those abstractions. But he's setting them up like bowling pins to be knocked down. One religion after another in these books is bad, 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 evil, 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 wrong, wrong, wrong. Now, basically what I'm saying to you is my hope is that the hive mind in the North, that the religion that Bran represents, will also be in some sense overturned as bad, evil, wrong. I mean, what we've been told again and again at this point, this could be a big difference from Dune, right? Well, big difference from the original trilogy of Star Wars. Also, Star Wars, in case you didn't know, was influenced by Dune. It's derivative of Dune to a remarkable extent. Okay, so in the original Star Wars, if you haven't seen all the movies and TV shows and crap that's been out, the very, very first film, the main thing you're told is, oh, this is an old, ancient religion that's disappeared and been forgotten, and nobody believes in it anymore. There are just a few people. Darth Vader is one of them. And there's this showdown where Darth Vader is facing off against some kind of military commander or general, and it's obvious most people have nothing but contempt for the Force and for the distant memory of the Jedi Knights, whatever they once were. Now, later in these films, including the so-called prequels, all of this changes, and in fact, this religion only disappeared couple decades ago. Well, it disappeared around the time Luke was born, and Luke is like 16. So okay, so 16 years ago, this completely screwed up the continuity, and that's lost. It's not possible for a mass religion and a whole army and series of civil wars and things like that. It's not possible for the Jedi Knights to be forgotten in 16 years. It's just ridiculous. But anyway, in the original film, one of the main things that's stressed is that this is this ancient doctrine that has become obscure and forgotten, and it's special, but now Luke is going to revive it. He's the chosen one who's going to revive this ancient mysterious doctrine. Okay, that's a trope we've all seen about 1,000 times. Got it. Well, George R.R. Martin sets you up with exactly the same pattern. Our Luke Skywalker is this kid in a wheelchair, this crippled boy, and it is emphasized again and again, right up to the end of the books as we now have them, right up to the end of the extant text. There are fewer and fewer children of the forest all the time. There are fewer and fewer ravens that are capable of doing this. Everything is shrunk. These are the last survivors in the last cave of this disappearing culture. Well, yes, it's possible he's going to just do the Luke Skywalker plot. It's possible he's going to do the Dune Battle for Arrakis plot. Well, guess what? The religion of these indigenous people who have been kind of ignored and mistreated by the authority, the peasant indigenous religion of the remote countryside, that's now going to become the religion of the empire. That would be the Dune structure, right? To take the Fremen in Dune, the indigenous people of the deep remote areas of the desert, and then take that and take over the capital and make it the emperor's ruling culture. Okay, that's possible. That's probably in version 0 of the text. The original draft for this to be only 3 volumes. It's probably exactly what Bran was going to do. He was going to take this religion from the cave and bring it to the capital city, and now everyone gets to be ruled by magical ravens that remember things that happened 1,000 years ago, and they get to put their consciousness into a hive mind. All this shit. Great. Okay. So it is totally possible. It is also possible that now, because the story has drifted and George R.R. Martin's interest has drifted a very long way away from that, it is totally possible that Bran will instead conclude, look, this religion has died out for a reason. You know what? Human sacrifice in front of a magical tree, that's something from the past that should stay in the past. It's just not that great. It's possible he's going to conclude, you know what really matters is his own life, and for everybody in society, their own lives here and now, and not to be beholden to a peculiar species of immortals, in a cave somewhere. Neither to be beholden to the trees, nor the ravens, nor the peculiar sort of immortality they represent. That maybe this should be left behind. Now, look, guys, I haven't even mentioned once here the so-called the great others. Right? I think nobody predicts. Maybe George R.R. Martin is going to surprise us all. Maybe the conclusion is that the great others march all the way south. Nobody stops the zombies. They completely conquer everything, and that's the end of civilization. They just wipe out Westeros. Completely ceases to exist after having been entirely conquered by the others. Nobody is predicting this. what will happen with the war with the great other, or what that represents. So I guess I might as well say it. Any of you know the books, I think, will already feel this and not really need it to be explained. But the political and philosophical significance of the great others is, of course, that it fails to unite Westeros against a common enemy. The warring factions, the feuds, the different ideologies and so on that they represent, the different notions of morality and the different religions they represent. They ought to all, I mean, hypothetically, they ought to all support Stannis. They ought to all unite behind Stannis. And, like Stannis says, he concludes that he doesn't have to become the king in order to save the kingdom. He has to save the kingdom in order to become the king. They could all back Stannis and say, look, you know what really, the thing that really matters right now is not the House of Dorne getting revenge for the murder of, the former wife of the king and so on. There's specific members of the royal family who were killed in the, a generation earlier. That's not what really matters. What really matters is that Dorne and, each of the houses, each with their own petty power-mongering politics going on, that they set those things aside. They set their religious differences aside, that the Iron Islands and the House of the North, that they all reconcile the differences and together fight against the great other, a term that comes straight out of a fucking anthropology textbook. It's about as subtle as an elephant in heat. Completely obvious, the symbolic significance. And they don't, and the lack of union and the continued infighting, far beyond the point of diminishing returns, far beyond the point where they're destroying their own possible survival and future. That's the political and philosophical significance. Okay, but what next? That's a good point. I mean, don't get me wrong. That's kind of a great and meaningful meditation for humanity. But okay, what's the conclusion? What's it all about? Look, there is no way that the political and philosophical conclusion in this book is Jaime Lannister has all the answers. It has been hinted at again and again. Jaime Lannister had the option to take the throne at many different points, and that he still could. Yeah, you tell me, do you think the actual conclusion story would just be like, well, Jaime Lannister learned all the lessons of House Lannister, he learned all the lessons from this war, and he's got the correct political philosophy. He knows what's best for the future of Westeros, so it's going to be reconciled, and the whole thing will be settled under his rule. There's no chance. I mean, if Jaime Lannister ever sits on the Iron Throne, I think it'll last for 2 chapters. It'll be 2 chapters before someone cuts his head off. It's hard to imagine that lasting any length of time. And it probably would make some kind of philosophical or political point. It's possible that's going to happen. Nobody thinks that his sister, Cersei Lannister, is, that's how it's going to end, is Cersei wins the war. Because Cersei knows how to rule a kingdom, because Cersei wants to impress, her deceased father. Cersei gets her revenge against the male gender. She resents that she wasn't born a boy and she was never good enough to please her father. And the end of the plot is she's finally satisfied. She went. Nobody thinks this is possible. And the reason for this is fundamentally, this was implicit in the first half of the discussion of the video. This is a book written for political and philosophical purposes, right? It's not the case that he is just writing a story and then happens to be bolting on political philosophy afterwards. The whole story is structured about, and the reason why it's meaningful and the reason why these things are unfolding is a kind of political and philosophical hypothesis. So I won't say it again. The part of that political philosophy that's easy to iterate, that's easy to specify, is the critique of religion, right? Okay. But what is the book saying positively about religion? That's very hard to say. Right? The part of the book that's easy to analyze, specify, adumbrate, iterate, part that's easy to deal with is the critique of feudalism, right? Okay, so we don't have to talk about it. We're all sophisticated people, right? Critique of feudalism. Okay, but what is it saying positively? Whether about democracy or about something better than feudalism? What is it saying about? I can't say it's saying anything positive about feudalism. This is one of the most rousing condemnations of feudalism of the last century. This is a really in-depth, passionate condemnation of feudalism, and in many ways a passionate condemnation of religion too, the religion of the Dark Ages, broadly speaking. Okay, but you don't think he's condemning feudalism because he thinks we should go back to living like the nomadic horse people of Essos, do you? That would be an easy novel to write. Any of you could write that novel. Okay? The novel is Daenerys Targaryen grows up in this horrible feudal society. She's exiled. She runs away to live on the wild plains with, much better life enjoyed by nomadic people living at a lower level of technology, blah, blah, blah. And she learns, oh, this is really the life worth living, and then brings it back to Westeros and burns down all the stone houses and forces people to go back to living as nomads. That would be a much easier novel to write, right? You have a very simple sense of good and evil. Oh, so society living in settled villages, towns, and cities, that's bad. Nomadic warrior, slave trading, horse riding, this kind of pseudo Mongolian parallel universe in Essos. Oh, and that's good. That's the life that's worth living, and then transpose one to the other. Obviously, that's not the point. Obviously, I don't think Daenerys Targaryen represents any kind of positive philosophy or morally superior forms of it. So, withering critique of religion, yes. Withering critique of feudalism, yes, obviously. But what is the point positively? What is it that Brandon Stark is going to learn in that cave? That is the conclusion. That is the point of Game of Thrones, of the whole A Song of Ice and Fire universe. And by the way, this is also why it's fundamentally really quite meaningless to go back further in the timeline. There's really nothing interesting in dealing with the foundation of, the House of the Dragon, or whatever you want to call it, the founding of House Targaryen. Because again, in terms of political philosophy, what the book is dealing with, it doesn't have to do with that. It's not really interested in the justification of a system of feudalism through the bloodline of the rulers being linked to telepathic control of dragons. The further back you go in the history, the further you go away from, this unique drama that's in the Song of Ice and Fire books, the turning point in history that this is all about. It really, I recognize HBO is trying to make money by going further back in the timeline instead of further ahead. And there were proposals going all the way back to the Age of Heroes, to some, go back to kind of the Stone Ages in Westeros. But then, fundamentally, what is the point? How can we have a book or a movie or a TV show that's just glorifying the victory of the dragon riding people who conquered this society and created this horrible feudal system that the books, these Song of Ice and Fire books, exist to criticize, excoriate, and ultimately overturn, like to show the badness of. It's just, I know it's an overused term. It's kind of tone deaf to engage in a glorification of House Targaryen when the whole point is setting them up as the evil that Westeros didn't have any good to contrast to it. Like the House Targaryen had to fall. It had to be torn down. And the whole society created by House Targaryen had to be torn down. It's completely ridiculous to have a society based on people believing in the genetic superiority of albinos. That's what we're talking about, right? Albinism. We're talking about people born with white hair and purple eyes. They have a genetic abnormality, and everyone's supposed to worship them. Well, read the actual Dunk and Egg novels. Read the way that's depicted. That's that society that had to be torn down. There's nothing positive about the rule of the Targaryens. It's depicted in this really, really negative way, this really thoroughgoing critique of, again, feudalism and religion. So I think the step backward being taken by HBO, I can only see the disadvantages of it and not the advantages, because it's in as much as you're turning this into a glorification of a celebration of House Targaryen. You're taking a meaningful story and rendering it completely meaningless. Oh, right, guys. Sorry. In terms of the conclusion of the book, nobody seems to think that the conclusion of the story is to reestablish House Targaryen, right? Like, whether or not that's through the bloodline of Jon Snow being revealed, nobody thinks, oh, well, the point is Westeros has been messed up because they have been lacking dragons and lacking a supposedly genetically superior sub-race of humanity, of genetically superior feudal house that is the only group of people capable of riding the dragons. So the way to solve Westeros' problems is to restore to the throne someone with that bloodline, whether that's Jon Snow or not, whether that's Daenerys Targaryen or not, to restore to the throne people with white hair and strange eyes who have some kind of genetic advantage in riding dragons, and then problems will be solved. Why? Because you'll go back to completely hopeless despotism forever and ever. So I just mentioned everyone knows there is this issue of the Targaryen bloodline, obviously with Jon Snow being one of the main characters, so on and so forth. And in this sense, nobody cares. Nobody thinks that can be the real political and philosophical significance of the books, right? That can't be the conclusion that this is working its way towards. And look, again, if it wasn't already implicitly obvious enough, our understanding of the political and philosophical significance of this huge corpus of text leading up to that conclusion, right? We can't really understand any of it until the end of the story is shown. And that's also why I think it's so important to analyze what version 0 of the text would have been. What the text would have been if George R.R. Martin had just written that short 3-volume version that was set out in the initial proposal to the publisher. I mean, Sivas, the literal Game of Thrones in the book. He didn't even have that idea until like volume 5 or 6 or something of the series. It's not there in the first book, Game of Thrones. All right. Yeah, well, life is like a game of Sivas. This goes on and on and on. Right? We have all these discussions about politics and the nature of different characters being shown and reflected on from the way they play Sivas, right? So you have all this symbolism, all these references and reference, right? But until the story is done, and it may never be done, there is this real sense in which we can't know what he is going on about. But again, based on the corpus of his work leading up to this, it seems very difficult to believe that the conclusion is just going to be, oh, well, Braavos had it right all along. That's the way to organize society, or that any of the city-states of Essos had it right. It's certainly not going to be, we have to get back to being ruled by the bloodline of ancient Valyria. So, George R.R. Martin has now been, deep. I mean, he's been deeply committed to this kind of this long game of Sivas, this long series of reflections and analyses and critiques of politics and religion. And again, the negative analytical element, what it is he's against, what it is he's criticizing, what it is he's excoriating, that's very clear. But the extent to which we really remain in the dark about the positive conclusion, well, it's fascinating. In a word, it's fascinating. And I cringe to think that the conclusion of this book is ultimately just going to be the same as A Song for Leah and 7 Times Never Kill Man. Because it's very possible. It's very possible that George R.R. Martin hasn't changed, and that all he can do in the end is point the finger and say, look, humanity can't be happy until it can imitate a beehive in the organization of its behavior, and until we have this totally fictional notion of a hive mind. I'm just going to look at the questions here because I did have some questions and comments coming in. Melissa has been patiently sitting through this performance. Is there anything you want to ask about? Anything you want to draw my attention to?
No, I just think it's funny that when you mentioned the drowned god, I was thinking just that, and I had a smile come to my face because I was thinking of just the ridiculousness of the religion within Game of Thrones. That was
right.
What I was thinking of.
Right. So the drowned god, though, it really is true to form for Martin in that it's taking some of the fictional aspects of religion and making them physically real and even scientifically real. So, they have a resurrection experience, a life after death experience, where they're briefly drowned and resuscitated. They're given CPR after drowning. And that this is, in the cultural context, a great deal is made of it. So this is moving beyond mere baptism, where people are briefly black out, drowning, and then come back from the dead. And this is at the crux of their religious experience. So, I mean, that's really the way he likes to write about religion. Is to look at something and say, okay, well, your religion has resurrection. Okay, well, what if there really is resurrection? Okay, well, your religion promises immortality of the soul. Okay, well, what if there really is immortality of the soul? And then to kind of expose it or demonstrate it in a tragic way. So in A Song for Leah, you get immortality of the soul. your body is also literally consumed. You're eaten alive by a kind of parasite. That's how you achieve this immortality. So, I mean, now, again, to be honest, I don't think this is great writing. But this is something that's been in science fiction and fantasy for a very long time. The idea that you have to make some kind of terrible sacrifice. Now, again, some of that, I feel that the earlier books are not as well written as the later books. But you do get these ideas already, even in Daenerys Targaryen, demanding that this ritualist save the life of her husband. Khal Drogo, the king of the horse lords, whatever you want to say.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, well, I can do that for you. And it is magic. It is supernatural. You can have immortality, but of his body only. It's the immortality of the body, not of the soul. And this is contrasted to, there are several ways in which you do have immortality of the soul in Game of Thrones. You can be immortal in the mind of a raven flying around a cave in the Arctic Circle. Is that the kind of immortality you want? Because look, I'm just saying, if that were on offer, I wouldn't want it. I'm not interested. I'm not buying. If that's your religion, I'm not buying. And I'm not going to engage in human sacrifice or animal sacrifice in front of a magical tree to get it. But yeah, that's really his pattern. And the idea that religion would take away people's extreme sexual desires or evolved mating instincts and control overpopulation as a result, that it would kind of discipline and subdue a population, which obviously is a certain kind of anthropological way of looking at what religion is in the real world. In 7 Times Never Kill Man, that's made real. Where it's like, oh, okay, so they have this mystical religion, and it actually takes away their more ape-like instincts, their more mammalian instincts, and they have this very limited sex drive, and they mate in this, they reproduce in this controlled way, and then when they lose their religion, all of these instincts return, and instead they're having too many babies and too much violence and internecine fighting. So they recover these more human and also more mammalian aspects of their character that their religion was taking away. So that is very much what he likes to do again and again and again. But, what is the point? Like, you can ask this. This is a legit question you can ask even of the books as they already exist. So the books may never be finished. Looking at the corpus of literature we have already, for George R.R. Martin, in the political philosophy of George R.R. Martin, what is true happiness? There are so many things you can look at and say, oh, this is not true happiness. This is not true happiness. This is a false kind of happiness. Tyrion Lannister, money is not happiness. Sleeping with prostitutes is not happiness. Alcohol is not happiness. And, again, you can also find these ideas throughout his other writings, his writing prior to Song of Ice and Fire, Game of Thrones. He's not a hedonist in this sense. He doesn't really believe in, many of his characters sleep around. Not Jaime Lannister, interestingly. I mean, Jaime Lannister lives this kind of chaste life, despite his deplorable relationship with his own sister. But anyway, otherwise, he's not comfortable with his sexuality this way. But, what is happiness in Game of Thrones? From the very beginning, and including in the Dunk and Egg novellas, happiness is not serving an oath. Happiness is not honor. Happiness is not living by a knightly code, right? In a very 1960s way, George R.R. Martin is instead saying to you all the time, hey, all this stuff about chivalry and knightly honor and living by an oath and a code, that's just the man trying to keep you down. That's just the system oppressing us. That's throughout the whole thing, right? You see that. There's this sense of rebellion against honor and nobility and all those tropes. I mean, I don't just mean that he's subverting them in some literary sense. He's really telling you this is bad and evil and wrong. This is not true happiness. But what is, right? Okay, you could really rapidly go through all the religions. The religion of R'hllor, the religion of R'hllor is not offering you true happiness, even though it does offer you prognostication about the future. That's one of the most desirable things for people in the whole history of the world, wanting to know the future, wanting to control the weather. I mean, there are certain things that people have for millennia hoped to find in religion. Well, the religion of R'hllor actually offers you many things. I mean, magically in this book, oh, okay, so if you join this religion and if you do this kind of thing, you can stare into the fire and you can actually get guidance and advice and visions of the future and so on, and by the way, some people take the view that the religion of R'hllor hasn't revealed the things that will actually happen in the future, that instead it's only revealing like what's currently unfolding kind of thing, to carry the book. Well, in case you forget, there was definite foreknowledge that if Tyrion Lannister got on a particular boat, this is when he's a prisoner, that there would be a shipwreck and that he would instead end up with Daenerys Targaryen. So that is a prognostication for the future for something incredibly improbable and something that nobody had control over, an uncontrolled shipwreck, and it happened. So again, he's taking something that's normally fictional in religion, or is even a swindle in religion in the real world. Like someone promises you they can show you what's going to happen in the future. He says, oh, okay, well, let's make that real within this fantasy science fiction world. And it's tragic and it's horrible and it reveals to you the darkness of human nature, right? Like, oh, like, wouldn't it be a wonderful world if this thing we dream of or wish for in religion were real? No, it wouldn't be wonderful. Here's what human nature is really like. That's what he likes to do again and again. So likewise, I mean, someone could hypothesize, you could write a very boring novel where the religion of the Iron Islands just satisfies human nature and that's it. How about, by the way, just the religion of, in the southeast of Westeros, where they still fight, where they still decide who's guilty and who's innocent because they believe in the religion of the Seven so much that they just fight duels of honor. So this is throughout Westeros, but the conservative parts of Westeros still do this. In the Vale, that's what I was thinking of. So in the Vale, they still believe in this, right? Oh, well, Tyrion Lannister is on trial. So is that good? Is it good to have people believe that a sword fight reveals the will of the gods? Is that good or evil? I mean, obviously, it isn't fair to say that George is satirizing these things. It's not a satire of religion. He's saying, oh, okay, let me show you what life is like in a society where people really believe in fate, where people really believe that minor and trivial things you can't control, or who wins a sword fight and this and that is the fate of the gods, or reveals the, oh, and guess what? Here's what human nature is like, So, and again, even in that case, was Tyrion Lannister innocent or guilty? Does anyone believe, even within this fictional world, that who wins a sword fight really does reveal guilt or innocence in a trial? And the next, Tyrion does his same trick again. As you know, he has another trial by combat. And what was the conclusion of that trial? And by the way, the murder mystery, who actually... the different murder mysteries and who's responsible for what, some of them also remain still undisclosed and unknown. Who actually killed Joffrey Baratheon? Justice for Joffrey. Well, if you believe in the trial by combat, then you have your answer, right? If you believe in the gods, and maybe that is the answer. Maybe that's the plot twist. Is that So no, I just say that's very much his pattern with that. Many people, many YouTubers even, they try to interpret the books as being anti-war. I think that's not true. I mean, I think that's actually a real misunderstanding. It's not anti-war. I think, like all of us, George R.R. Martin is opposed to fighting meaningless wars for meaningless reasons. But okay, we had Samwell Tarly mentioned here. So someone said Samwell Tarly for king, at least he reads books. But that's not the point of his, so look, if George R.R. Martin, if the political philosophy, if he really were a pacifist, that could be the conclusion. It could be, Samwell Tarly was rejected by his own father. His own father, we eventually find out, is a really great military leader. It's many books later that we get his father fleshed out as a character a bit, by the way. But you guys, some people might read the books and they might not even connect them. It's so many pages later. But Samwell Tarly's father does come up again thousands of pages later, or whatever, many, many hundreds of pages later. Okay, so his father was a great military leader. His father rejected him for being a coward. But in fact, Samwell Tarly is the best possible political leader. That a different author could have written that book. We say, no, who's really, the better way to organize society is to have people like Samwell Tarly as our leaders. That is not George R.R. Martin's perspective. I mean, I would wager money. Maybe George would then do it intentionally just to take my money away from me. But there is no chance that the point and conclusion of the book is Samwell Tarly is right. And among other things, ultimately, coward or not, Samwell Tarly has to fight against the great other, which is that ultimately there are some things worth fighting for and worth fighting about. That runs through all the books. Even the mercenary who worked for Tyrion Lannister and then he ends up eventually parting ways with him. He has a simple name like Grim, and I'm forgetting it now. What is it? Braun. So, Braun, the mercenary, to me, it's actually very touching and moving that he ends up in this situation where he's in this small castle and may have to fight for his life against Tyrion's sister, as she temporarily takes over power. And, you have these really deadly, serious struggles for survival within politics in terms of civil war, and then also with one kingdom against another. I don't get the sense at all that George R. R. Martin is anti-war in that sense. He doesn't. It's not that he thinks all war is bad or fruitless, or that Sam Tarley is going to write. But again, that could, any of you could write that book instead. Someone else could write a book that's sincerely anti-war, and where also, by the way, I don't even think what he's saying about Essos is that the problem with those people is that they love war or something. The critique of Essos is not a critique of war. The books as a whole, they contain a great deal of reflection on man's inhumanity to man, for sure. And yet they are not anti-war. And by the way, the books as we currently have them, one of the last things Sam Tarley says, I know it's not the absolute last thing, but toward the end of the text that we've got, of course, someone asks him, "Are you still a coward?" And he proudly says, "No, I've fought a great other. I've done this, I've done that." That he regards himself, he no longer is a coward, that he's gotten over it, that he's accepted the role of violence and war. So in as much as Sam Tarley is a mouthpiece for the philosophy of George R. R. Martin, he's someone who started off as a fat book-reading nerd and a coward, but who did indeed man up, as they say, who did indeed come to embrace a notion of himself as a more active and muscular character in the abstract sense of muscular. Yeah. And by the way, that may be what's coming next in his plot. I think it's quite likely that in the books, as in the TV show, he's going to reject becoming a maester. He's going to say, "Screw this, I've got to go back and fight a war." It's handled very poorly in the TV show. Presumably that is what's going to happen. He's not going to do 5 years of training. He's going to briefly talk to the people at the Citadel and say, "Well, look, there's a war to fight. I'm going to go back and fight it." But yeah, what do you say?
I found your discussion of the hive mind, the science fiction,
yes,
quite interesting, and I appreciated hearing your perspective on that. It's something I don't think you and I have talked about.
Well, my thesis is that is the center of the story, that is what the book's organized around. And version 0 of the text, I think that's clear. So, but I may be wrong. I think in version 0 that's the case. We'll see what happens with the final text. Go on, yeah.
Yeah, I just thought, you remember Arya Stark's involvement with the many-faced god religion?
Yes. Which hasn't been mentioned in this episode. There's so much to talk about in Game of Thrones. Right.
Thought of how that relates to the science fiction
right.
idea of the hive mind.
Yes.
How we might be influenced by that.
Right.
That's
right. No. So look, it's a great example and extends this discussion, and it's especially interesting to talk about politically. Okay, the many-faced god of Essos. So everyone assumes this is just a shaggy dog story, that this isn't the main plot. And I think that's probably right. But if I'm wrong, it's even more interesting, right? Like the story of Bran and his voyage to the north and whatever his spiritual discovery is, and then his return, that is the central story of these books. That's not my choice. It's not my preference. Probably be more interesting if Arya Stark is the main character and is the central story that way. If her voyage to Braavos and her return, if that's the world-changing spiritual discovery, right? But clearly it's not. Again, if I were writing the book, maybe I would make Arya Stark that kind of world-transforming, epoch-defining hero character. But that's not the book George is writing. Okay, the religion of the many-faced god, the death cult of Braavos, it's not a hive mind. It's a religion, we are explicitly told, created by a slave rebellion. So this is political, right? So you had these slaves rebelling against the slave masters. This was the oppressed against the oppressor. And then after that brief initial period, it's remained tolerated within Braavosi society that anyone can take revenge on anyone. And again, George R.R. Martin is anti-revenge, comes up, it's explicitly articulated throughout the book. But that anyone can take revenge on anyone just by basically asking to do so at this temple. And let's be clear, there's no trial, there's no jury, there's no presentation of evidence. So what do you think happens in the real world? The TV show completely dropped the ball on this. I mean, if George R.R. Martin has a heart attack tomorrow, we'll never hear. But obviously in the book, this is not being praised and held up to you as an excellent idea. Hey, what do you think would happen if we opened a temple of the many-faced god in Las Vegas, Nevada? next week? How many people playing cards are convinced? I'm certain that guy cheated me in poker, and we'll go to the temple. And like human nature is dark. How many people are going to get revenge, and how many other people for what petty reasons, or just based on a lie, based on a misperception or misconception? So far in the book, none of that has been dealt with. None. None. There has been no skepticism or scrutiny on the morality of the temple of the many-faced God. And now this is partly because we're seeing it from the perspective of a child who, unlike in the TV show, she has a very good quality of life there, the quality of food and clothing and so on she has. She's actually taken care of very well there, and she's very happy about being at the temple. The TV show made it look like a rather dreary, it made it look like slavery, her status, but that's not the case in the book at all. And she's in the process of learning this new language and doing all these different assignments under assumed identities, right? Yeah. So, the religion of the many-faced God, it's not a hive mind, right? So instead, you have the dead becoming a mask for the living so that the living can take out revenge, can carry out vendettas against other living people. Yeah. So it's a purely negative, purely subtractive. I mean, you could say it's the antithesis of immortality. Right. It's about mortality. It's about killing people. But yeah, in this weird way, the same ideas are there. And as you know, it's explicitly stated by Arya that when she's wearing the mask of this other person, that she takes on. So I'm afraid, does it actually, she takes on their memories? I don't know. But she takes on some of their character and feelings. Like there's some echo of the person that's with her. But I don't think it explicitly says they get the memories. Someone in the audience can. But in any case, it's not like Bran's experience, and it's also not like warging with the wolf. So if there is some mention of getting little glimpses of memories of the person, I think there is maybe. I think there's a brief statement that when she has this mask on, she has some access to the memories or feelings of the girl. It might be in there in that same way. Yeah, but look, a totally different book. And again, we don't know what the significance of Bran's journey, Bran's spiritual transformation in the North is. But he's going to return to the South and then transform the South. Nobody thinks that Arya Stark is going to Braavos and is going to bring back the religion of the many-faced God, this death cult, and that's the better way to organize society, or the better way to live, or the better religion for all of us to believe in. I mean, it seems obviously just to be a kind of, frankly, a form of organized crime that's tolerated in Braavos for historical reasons, and has religion draped on it rather loosely and rather unjustifiably. One might say it's a place where people commit suicide and people take revenge on others. I mean, it's an ugly, horrible aspect of their culture. I mean, can anyone say Braavos would be a worse place if they got rid of this society of assassins who pretentiously, kind of present themselves as priests among us? It's just ridiculous. But, and also, by the way, I mean, I'm not in favor of suicide too. I mean, the people who come and commit suicide because they're brokenhearted or something. That's another aspect of that time. Right. So I would say that's just as impossible as it is to believe that George R.R. Martin is cheerleading for the religion of the Iron Islands, which some people would. Ted Kaczynski would be pro Iron Islands. Ted Kaczynski would be pro, pro Khal Drogo. Yeah, right. Everyone says pro horse riding nomad. That is not George R.R. Martin's political philosophical agenda. He is also not in favor of the temple of the many-faced God. It's completely ridiculous to read the text as if that's the hypothesis he's counterposing to everything he's criticizing in feudalism, religion, and so on. So.
Yeah, I can see what you're saying, that it's not like the same idea as the story about Leah. Sorry.
Yeah. A Song for Leah, right.
So it's not seeing it in an optimistic way.
Right.
So that is kind of interesting to me, that in the Game of Thrones series, he hasn't seen it as transformative in the same way as his earlier stories, this hive mind idea. But to me, I just did find it interesting to. It's funny to say this, but I found it interesting that you say that you are not interested in this idea of the hive mind.
Yes.
You don't think this is something worth putting into literature, because it's as you term yourself a biological nihilist. that you find this as uninteresting as eating and digesting somebody's food. Yeah, I just thought for somebody who is interested in reading history, that you might find this idea inspiring, that you'd be able to take on people's memories or. But
I think it's less meaningful than wearing someone else's clothes. I mean, I think that it's hard to do. It's hard to get to that point of nihilism where you realize, no, even my memories and even my emotions are really just implements that I use and that are discarded. That I discard, and that at some point, I may be the one discarded, and then my memories and my emotions go along with me. I mean, this has come up under many different headings in our relationship, but we don't talk about it in terms of acting or theater or performance, for the camera. But I think it is a real turning point where you just admit to yourself that, for example, crying is a signal we have to show others how we feel, and by the way, I don't necessarily mean manipulating or misleading people. You weep to tell someone that you're in distress, to show someone that you're suffering and what it is you're concerned about. Weeping is a signal. It's a form of communication. That's all it is, And, it's obviously, especially as a child, it's very easy to feel that emotional experiences and so on are more real than reality. Your feelings are more real than the things you feel them about or feel them in response to. But, weeping and anger and all of that, these are, these are tools, these are kinds of implements, and they're never going to be as meaningful as the purpose they're put to, as why you're using the tool. It's a way of doing it. And again, this stuff I had to think about when I was involved in the theater, when I was involved in acting, and something to think about, when you're talking about, culturally, the whole concept of antidepressant medication and so on and so forth, the medicalization and reification of feelings that goes on philosophically, culturally, and politically in our times. And, like there's a real sense in which, we clothe ourselves with sadness. We clothe ourselves with emotion. We exhibit emotion in the same way that we wear clothes as a signal to other people, in the same way that clothes may conceal more than they reveal about you. This is all it is. I mean, to profoundly deal with the shallowness of the figments of our imagination, whether those are emotions, feelings, memories, or what have you, to really accept that. I think it's a hard thing to do. I think it's an inevitable part of growing up. And again, the deeper lesson is, if my grandfather had something meaningful to share with me about what happened in World War II, it's not enough for him to feel it. It's not enough for him to remember it. It's not enough for him to break down weeping either. You know what I mean? He actually has to put in a level of effort tantamount to creating a work of art, to share that with me. And by the way, guys, I'm not saying this to insult anyone. You may know some people who tell the same stories again and again. Like, you've known them for many years. They told you that story when you were younger. Then maybe you saw them telling someone else the same story 10 years later. That is a kind of art. I mean, that's the storyteller's art. In a time before YouTube and a time before filmmaking was financially viable for normal people, it used to cost a lot of money just to have a film camera. There was a sense in which, of course, you could also write a song about your experience or whatever. People used to, more than they do today, prepare and perform a story about something that happened. And it might be a story that's amusing, and it might be a story that's heartbreaking. And there were people who measured out their whole lives in a series of these stories that they did share with their grandchildren, where they really put in that effort. But that is an art, that's not a thought. It's not a feeling. It's not an emotion. It's not a merging of consciousness or anything else. And when you really know people and you can cross-examine the stories they're telling, you can often point out, well, yeah, but, you're lying about or concealing this other thing that's there. You're telling the story in a certain way. Again, as with the clothes we wear, they conceal more than they reveal. Now, of course, this is not to dismiss the thing. So both of my grandfathers were involved in World War II in very different ways. One of them was out doing combat. The other was on a military base. And neither of them ever told me anything meaningful about their experience in World War II. And
both my grandfathers were in World War II as well.
Never told you anything about it.
I don't
Right,
recall.
sorry, I'm just sorry to cut you off, but they may not have had anything meaningful to tell. Like from their perspective, war is waiting. Even on the combat lines, we're like, yeah, I spent a lot of time standing around holding a cup of coffee, waiting for orders, and then I got the orders, and I got my motorcycle and went over to the, what is it that's meaningful to tell? So, again, this is a false thing to presume that there was a great story to tell there. But to take that experience and make it into a story. If you guys, for some people, this will be the first video I ever saw on my channel. I had all kinds of experiences in Cambodia and Laos and Thailand. Okay. And, I've had many people say to me, including my own mother, I tell her some anecdotes about my experiences out there because we didn't talk for like 10 years. I was alienated from my parents. The alienation was mutual. So when I tell her anecdotes with time, she always immediately says, "Oh, you have to write a memoir. You have to write an autobiography. Oh, you have to make a film about this or something." And, well, you could, yeah, these things are meaningful. But, to take that story and fashion it and communicate it to make it meaningful for an audience, that is an art, and it's not a memory you're sharing, it's not, now, again, we're talking so far about things that have some kind of very obvious meaning because they're political. I mean, that's the reality. Why is your grandfather's experience of World War II significant? Obviously political and historical significance. But, the average self-pitying middle-aged male reflecting on relationships that didn't work out, loves that were lost, sexual encounters and experiences that were dissatisfactory or didn't end the way they wanted to. Your grandparents never told you about that either. Mine didn't tell me about that. Yeah, are we missing out? And again, not that can't be made into a work of art, but what a huge challenge to take. It's not so much that memory is meaningless; it's that it is by nature self-serving. We study history not for what it subtracts from the past, but for what it adds to the present. Memory as such is just self-serving, but to turn it into something meaningful for someone else, that is an art. Great question from the audience. Quote, any thoughts on Star Trek? That'd be a whole different live stream, I think. Yeah. I think overall Star Trek shows the tragedy of trying to have any kind of meaningful project that's just run by a heartless corporation where there's no author, no artist, or no team of authors or artists at the center who define it. What would Game of Thrones be without George R.R. Martin? What if George R.R. Martin had died 10 years ago? You know what I mean? Star Trek isn't even like that. There's no book it's working from. But the centerlessness of Star Trek and the aimlessness of Star Trek, very much results from the structure of authorship. And to give them credit, you might not know this about Star Trek, but for most of the history of the TV show, they were open to anyone sending in a spec script. So anyone, like some guy living in Los Angeles could write his idea for a script, send it in. And Gene Roddenberry would look at it. So like Star Trek: The Next Generation, the Jean-Luc Picard era, and you had a shot of getting your show made. You could just come up with, so anyone could contribute. I mean, this is before the internet, so there was some barrier because you had to pay for postage. You had to actually print it out on paper and send it in. And people did. There were people who got episodes made out of their ideas, and that's the same way the books were written too. These novels. So I'm only answering this because it certainly is a contrast to just how centrally organized the Game of Thrones literature is. That at this point, absolutely everything is the product of just one man. This literature is entirely the result of one man's genius and sometimes his lack of genius. So it's all thanks to him, and it also can all be blamed by. So yeah, we have some comments here agreeing with or reflecting further on some things that have come up in the discussion already. So Lakiss says, quote, on a superficial level, I suspect that maybe George R.R. Martin projects a lot of himself onto Bran as he is the frustrated hive mind of A Song of Ice and Fire, in a sense. Great question from Matthew Aki. quote, reading is definitely better than video games for various reasons. However, how can we justify reading fiction instead of philosophy, nonfiction, etc.? Don't. I mean, Matthew, anything in your life that requires justification, just don't justify it. That's really all I have to say about that. Just don't. I've said this before. One of the reasons why I'm very bad at spelling the names of the Game of Thrones characters, like, Daenerys Targaryen, is that the vast majority of this I heard as books on tape. And it was actually originally, it was while packing and unpacking. Later, I listened to this stuff while working out at the gym. But my first encounter with literature, you'd be surprised how much time you spend packing up suitcases and furniture and stuff like that. But, it competed with listening to podcasts for me in that way. But, obviously I could have been listening to something else podcast. But if you think you have to justify it, don't. I think it's that simple. People, as soon as you recognize that you're justifying drinking alcohol, don't don't justify it and don't drink alcohol. So no, if you've got any problem that way, and if you've got something better to read, we have such a stack of books here. No, and then that's also much earlier in this broadcast. I said, look, I don't even know how I'm going to feel when the next book gets published. Take a look at my reading list. I have better things to do. I really do. 5 years ago, I was so positively motivated for this, but now, I don't know how I'm going to feel if or when the next book comes out. And obviously, some of the spin-off books that George himself has written, there's just this collective shrug of the shoulders from even the most diehard Game of Thrones fans. So Valor in the audience says that he's afraid that George might be a little bit Heinlein in his political views. So I do actually know Heinlein enough to know what you're getting at. I would the real comparison to Heinlein would be about sexual politics and the family and so on. That would be an interesting. Someone could write an essay on that. George, to what extent did Heinlein influence George R.R. Martin is an interesting question. So I continue the comment here. Quote, he views elective systems as superior, but he's American, and it's common, especially for many of his era, to be Roman fetishes. So, okay, Melissa and I, we've been reading a lot of stuff from ancient Rome in this last year, primary source stuff, not modern books about ancient Rome, but texts translated from Latin into English directly. I don't see it in A Song of Ice and Fire. I don't see any admiration for ancient Rome in it. I'm just being honest with you. I don't have a lot more to say about that. So that's interesting. You have two suggestions here. One is about the connection to Heinlein. And that probably some of the darker elements of incest and the nature of the family, what have you, you can make an argument there. But someone else will have to write an essay about that, whether it's what Heinlein says about democracy, what he says about the military, what he says about war, or ancient Rome. But no, I really don't see George R.R. Martin having any significant interest in or sympathy for ancient Rome. Okay, so question from Lakis, and fair enough question. Quote, why would any philosophy found in A Song of Ice and Fire, etc., need to provide true happiness? So I think you're misunderstanding the point I'm making, but I'll continue. Quote, I mean, even George R.R. Martin said the ending will be bittersweet. Okay. So it's not the case that a philosophy needs to be about happiness. This is not what I said, and that's not what I was insinuating or suggesting indirectly. The point is, you can quite quickly come to the point of what someone's philosophy is by narrowing down what do they say in this corpus of literature about true happiness. So I'll give you two examples from myself. One, my own book, No More Manifestos. As you can even guess from the title, there's a lot of criticism of politics. There's a lot of negative things said about politics, some about religion too, right? Okay, but if you say, look, positively, what is this guy saying about the meaning of life? And also positively, what is he saying about politics? A very rapid way to say, okay, we got all these pages. I don't know how many hundreds of pages it is. Let's rifle through it. What is he saying positively about happiness? What is this positive example of happiness? That will normally indicate to you what this person has to say about philosophy and indeed about political philosophy. That this person says to you, look, true. So someone writes a book. I mean, a very conventional right-wing conservative may write a long book or series of books with a lot of, some right-wing conservative writes a book criticizing left-wing people. But when I ask you, okay, what is the model of happiness in this book? Let's say it's Ben Shapiro or something. Ben Shapiro's model of happiness is a heterosexual man married to a heterosexual woman, raising children, and doing these same fucking religious rituals forever and ever. This is very simple. That's happiness. For him, white picket fence in the suburbs, religious heterosexual couple. He has a very normal, boring, very narrow, boring idea of happiness. That is his idea of human happiness. Some other writer writes a book where they say, look, the only way to be happy is to go out and really take risks, really be a creative artist, really be this kind of reckless figure, pushing your own boundaries, getting out of your own comfort zone. Different authors will have different ideas of happiness that will very rapidly bring you to an understanding of what their philosophy is if you're looking through a corpus of text. So I've said this about my own book, which very few of you have read. Some of you have read it. Say, okay, well, you can. I mean, it's not a summary of the book. It's sort of like a fish hook you can put out there and then bring you to the heart of the matter rapidly. An intelligent person could do an analysis of a book and say, well, okay, Eisel Mazard says all this stuff, critique of politics, critique of history, critique of religion under many different things. Okay, but when he talks about happiness, when he talks about what it is to be alive and what is the meaningful life, which comes up in many different parts of the book, you can bring that together and that really shows you what this guy's philosophy is all about. This is what he thinks a meaningful life is. This is what he thinks it means to be happy as an individual and for the organization of society as a whole, what that requires for the organization of society. Now, I can also say that about the corpus of literature on this YouTube channel. I don't know, 3,000 videos, thousands, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of monologues have been uploaded to this channel. And if someone says to you, well, look, Eisel Mazard, Abba Ciel, you have this huge sprawling corpus of literature produced over many years, talking about many different political issues, ethical issues, philosophical issues. Okay, so what's it all about? What does it come down to? You could indeed attempt to summarize it, come to the heart of the matter by saying, okay, well, you know what? If you see what this guy Mazard says about happiness, about leading a meaningful life, that's a trail of breadcrumbs that takes you to this point. So yes, I do think that mode of analysis with the corpus of work of George R.R. Martin, it's telling, it's revelatory, it reveals exactly what I want to talk about in this video. Now, even though it is bittersweet, to use George R.R. Martin's favorite term, if you read his story, A Song for Elijah, I believe it has been published as a book. It's a standalone book. Anyway, it's not that long a book. If you read A Song for Elijah, it very clearly shows you this is happiness, this isn't. All right? It very clearly shows you people think sexual gratification is happiness, and they're wrong. People think they can overcome loneliness and isolation in life and the feeling that nobody else really understands them through a close sexual relationship with their husband and wife, and they're wrong, right? Like it's real. It's an incredibly demonstrative, transparent note. Now, it's also tragic. It's also bittersweet because the alternative it presents you with, this true unity achieved through the hive mind, it's horrible in some obvious ways, like you are devoured alive by a parasite. That's it. But that is the model of happiness, shown to you in that book. It tells you right away, philosophically and politically, what his point is. Now, again, so it was useful here. It's very easily used negatively when talking about the corpus of literature for Game of Thrones. And by the way, I've already made a video talking about it. Look at his book, Seven Times Never Kill Man. 7 Times Never Kill Man, very clearly the judgments about happiness. It is not telling you that organized religion will lead to true happiness. It is really clearly saying to you, organized religion is just the system trying to keep you down. It's just the man oppressing you. You might think this is liberating you. You might think this is doing these pauses, but actually religion is oppressive. It's completely clear what is happiness and what is not in that story also. So, does anyone think that what he is presenting as the religion of the seven is the way to be happy? That this is the way to be happy as an individual person or in the organization of society? Some other author would have written a much simpler book, that contrasts the Catholic society of the religion of the seven to the horse lords of Essos, the horse riding nomads, and where it's just very simple. This is not true happiness. This is, like in order to be happy, what you need to do is get back to living as a lawless nomad, where life is, in the words of Hobbes, nasty, brutish, and short. People have sword fights. People die of infections. People die of curable diseases. The rate of, maternal mortality and childbirth is very high. There's no medicine. There's no technology. But that's true. There are plenty of authors who would write that book. Where that's the contrast. Okay, here's the urban society, the Dark Ages. Then and one is true human happiness, and one isn't. That is not the contrast George R.R. Martin is providing you with. And of course, this becomes even more ridiculous if you try to say, well, life on the Iron Islands is really happy, or life in Dorne is happy. Nobody reads these books and thinks, oh, he's showing us that Dorne is the superior society. It's not. So it is a useful optic. It is a useful analytical way of viewing a corpus of text. And look, I think in some cases that analysis results in you condemning the author and really revealing what a terrible person the author is. Napoleon Bonaparte. What is Napoleon Bonaparte's idea of happiness for the individual and for society as a whole? Adolf Hitler. What is Adolf Hitler's idea of happiness? I mean, really, you can look at other historical figures. They all wrote books, in particular examples. Not everyone writes books. There are historical figures you can analyze in this way. And their idea of happiness, personal, individual happiness, and then how that's compatible with or incompatible with larger and larger units of social organization. I'll tell an anecdote really quickly. This relates to my own notion of myself as an author and as a filmmaker and what have you. I once sat down with my Aunt Judy. So now some of you are going to be able to Google her and find the person I'm talking about. I once sat down with my Aunt Judy, and this was in an ex-vegetarian restaurant. Some of you in Toronto will know which restaurant it was. It was a restaurant that used to be vegetarian. And they actually had a sign on the window at that time saying, sorry, we have chicken. They went from being vegetarian to being vegetarian, but also offering chicken. And I think eventually they just became a total meat serving restaurant. They became vegetarian with a chicken option because they weren't making enough money. So I remember on the sign on the restaurant said, sorry, we have chicken. So there's my Aunt Judy. And she said to me, I'm sorry, some of you heard this anecdote before. She said to me, we were talking about the fact that the film industry was thriving in Toronto at that time, which it was. And she says, yes, but what is the point of making all these movies if they're just crap? Like, what's the point of making them if they're just meaningless? And I laughed out loud at her. And it was a sincere laugh. It wasn't a contrived, oh, no, I really thought this was hilarious. And I asked her, what is the point of drinking water? What is the point of breathing air? Why do you think people want to eat food? And then said, across the street from there was a bookstore I've taken Melissa to, a secondhand used bookstore. So you stand in front of a shelf full of books in a bookstore like that. What percentage of these books are garbage or meaningless or whatever you want to put it? Like you're looking at like the novels section or something, but any section, even the nonfiction section. Is it 99%? Is it 99.9%? But the minority of us who want to do something meaningful, the minority of us who want to make a really meaningful film, it's possible for us to do so because of that 99%. They create and sustain the whole industry. All these people are fed and clothed and have apartments and breathe air and drink water thanks to the 99% of films that are meaningless. And then once in a while, someone gets to make one film that's meaningful. And I really see it positive that way. Like the publishing industry and book publishing. Well, I sure am glad there are 99% of books that are garbage because I get to publish my one book as a result. Like the whole, like what I'm doing has my meaningful life has a parasitic relationship to the meaningless life led by 90% of people or 99% of people or whatever it may be, whatever that percentage may be. And, I mean this in relation to the creative arts, filmmaking, so on and so forth. So this is a contrast because I view that positively. I feel gratitude. And I was going to be fucked up. Like I feel grateful toward the publishing industry because once in a while someone gets to publish a really important book, and once in a while it might be me. But even if I'm just a reader, I'm so grateful for these books I get to read that are good. But I realized they would not have been published. That publication wouldn't have been possible if it wasn't for the 99% of books that I disregard as meaningless. So this is true of publishing. This is true of the film industry, so on and so forth. And her view of it was instead of zero sum. Her view of it instead was fundamentally communist. she basically felt that the government should snuff out the freedom of the press and the film industry and control these things, so there were only, films being made that are approved by Joseph Stalin or what have you as being of a public benefit, educational benefit, or morally uplifting purpose or some of this. That's the kind of society she wants to live in. She's a fucking communist and not a moderate communist. Let me just add, that's her view of society. And she thinks that by reducing the number of meaningless films, you're going to increase the number of meaningful films. By reducing the number of meaningless books, you're going to increase the number of meaningful. And no, my view is the opposite. More garbage, more mainstream crap, more, the flourishing of the meaningless side of the industry will let that small minority flourish also. We, the authors who want to do something really meaningful, we're going to get to exist parasitically on the back of this great blue whale of an industry crashing through the waves that's, producing this kind of mainstream crap and feeding everybody involved, providing them with food and shelter that I can't do. I can't keep all the makeup artists in Los Angeles employed. But when I do make my one film, I expect to be able to just call in this makeup artist, call in all these technical people doing the lighting. Well, they're being employed making all this other crap. So I have a very positive view that way. This is also why I'm not an antinatalist. I'm not against life itself. I enjoy life. I'm very kind of, in this sense, pro-life. Word that has more than me. But, there are a lot of people who have a fundamentally, negative view of life. Well, so just when you see that, when you think about, what is happiness? What is happiness for the individual? What is happiness for the larger unit of society, right? And then do you see one as antithetical to the other, one as inimical to the other? Do you see the individual as trying to steal something away from the larger society or as contributing to the larger society and grateful to the larger society? These are big, profound differences. And that shows in people's writing. It shows in their writing when they're writing fiction. It shows in their writing when they're writing nonfiction. There are a lot of people who are fundamentally bitter, self-hating, antisocial people. And they write books where their notion of happiness shows that in their books. It shows that in their books and their films. Okay, well, this is what this guy thinks happiness is. Look, Voltaire. What does Voltaire ultimately think happiness is? So, Candide by Voltaire. The conclusion of the book and the positive model of happiness is of running away to live with your girlfriend or wife, whatever you want to say, is to run away to a cottage and live in this kind of isolation. And his turn of phrase that's become famous is just to cultivate your own garden, is to cut yourself off from society, cut yourself off from religion, go and get a cottage in the countryside and just grow your own vegetables. That's his model of happiness. And it's also, by the way, explicit to stop chasing beautiful women and just stay with the same one woman, even though she's ugly. Ugly and stupid, actually, in the book. It's explicit, but doesn't matter. Just settle down with one woman. Just take it. That's explicit in Candide. It's a long enough book to have more than one. That you should just live in a cottage with your one wife or girlfriend, even though she's ugly and stupid and you're not in love with her anymore, and just tend your own garden, to not make the world a better place. That is, at least in Candide, at least in that work, that is Voltaire's notion of happiness. And look at how he lived his own life, and look at what he did in politics in his own life. And that's what he did. He tried to tend his own garden. He got himself off in the struggle and so on. That really tells you something. And then when you know that, now if you go and read Candide a second time, because you only find that in the conclusion, you will see, frankly, you learn something about his fundamental shallowness that shows throughout the rest of his book and through the rest of what he has to say about both religion and happiness. Sorry, about both religion and politics. You'll see something like that. So yeah, you can tell a lot about a person. You can tell a lot about a writer. You can tell a lot about a political leader through the interrogation of their concept of happiness. It's a useful analytical structure. And, sometimes, of course, all it reveals is bad writing, is that there's really nothing that makes sense here. And, the character of Batman, what makes Batman happy? This collapses, it falls apart no matter what analysis you bring to it. Does Batman actually enjoy punching people? Is he that dark a character that he's on this kind of sadistic, cruel revenge fantasy? Is that his character? There have been so many different interpretations of Batman. Sometimes he is portrayed that way. Sometimes he's portrayed as an insane, revenge-seeking kind of sociopath. Sometimes, the original name of the comic book was Detective Comics. Sometimes he's a detective in a cape, where he's this very calm, he's a Sherlock Holmes-like figure. So, anyway, I don't have to go on and on about this. But yes, it is useful in terms of what is the happiness. Sorry, pardon me. What is the philosophy and what is the political philosophy of this book as a whole, and of this author as a person? I think it's a really really useful optic to bring to these things. So look, by the way, sorry, it's not the topic of this. Yeah, I agree. Little Water says Batman is an awful story. Agree. Look, what was Karl Marx's idea of happiness? Happiness for the personal individual and happiness for society as a whole. This is not going to reveal to you what a great person Karl Marx was, or what a great author he was, or what a great political philosophy he has. I think it reveals how shallow and limited and stupid Karl Marx's whole literary, political, and economic project is. Now, at the opposite extreme, if you look at most of the kind of right-wing libertarian authors, normally it's quite transparent. It's nakedly put out there right in front. Their idea of happiness, as they say in America, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. What happiness means to them, it's very clearly iterated to you up front, and it's often embarrassingly, horrifyingly shallow and self-centered and what have you. So yes, this can be applied constructively and destructively to different authors, revealing different, I think, important aspects of political philosophy in their writing. Okay, so I have a moment for this. I'm going to wrap this up in just a few minutes, guys. We're coming up to the 2-hour mark. If you guys have a second to hit the thumbs up button, I'd appreciate it. It'll just help more people find the broadcast, whether today, tomorrow, or 10 years from now. Wicked Energy comments, quote, doesn't listening to popular media make it easier to relate to other people sometimes? Isn't it alienating to not be familiar with popular films, music, etc.? Okay, so great question / comment. Have you ever been to Iran? If you lived in Iran for 5 years, would you listen to popular music there? Would you watch the popular films made by Iranian filmmakers? How about North Korea? I remember laughing at someone when they suggested to me, when I was living in Laos was at that time a communist dictatorship, by the way, that I would start getting into local music and film, music and TV shows like soap operas that they had. No. I learned a lot living in Laos, but no, I don't relate to or appreciate their pop music. I don't relate to or appreciate their cinema. And if I lived in Iran, living in Iran could be very rewarding for me. I mean, the critique politically of what's wrong with Iranian society and the religion and so on. I can imagine many ways which that'd be very stimulating and rewarding. No, I'm not going to sympathize with them. I'm not going to be interested in their pop culture, right? So, now notice I'm not giving you an answer no. I'm not saying there's nothing significant or meaningful about popular culture or mainstream. I'm not saying that. Take yourself out of your comfort zone. Think about some other cultures and think about what it really says about you, what it really means if you are immersed in the mainstream cinema of North Korea, of Iran, of Saudi Arabia, of communist China, of any of these places. Well, have you considered that I might be more alienated from Canadian society than you are from Iranian society or North Korean society? Right. So you ask, isn't it alienating not to be familiar with what's going on in pop culture? Isn't it alienating for me to be plunged into that culture, just as it would be alienating for you in Iran or North Korea? So Vaylor says, coming back to a point discussed quite some time ago, he didn't pull the Roman thing completely out of nowhere. If you type in GRRM Rome, you'll see 2 posts obsessing over the fictionalization of Rome's late Republic era. Yeah, well, so I have this city village. I didn't ridicule your point. I didn't say that's ridiculous or stupid. I just sat there and reflected honestly that I don't see any interest in Rome in the Song of Ice and Fire corpus of literature as it now exists. It's possible the next book will come out and it's all going to be related to the legacy of Rome. I don't see that anywhere in A Song of Ice and Fire, the serious interest in Rome. I also don't see it anywhere in the Thousand Worlds books, right? So, again, I'm not ridiculing you, but I feel that you will look in vain for that. Now, maybe, maybe you're right. Maybe that's exactly what's coming next. I mean, look, that is coming back to Karl Popper's philosophy. It would certainly be a daring prediction to say that Rome hasn't been talked about yet, because that will be the ideal of the conclusion book. So Valor, let's take your hypothesis and let's make it really sexy. Let's make it really provocative. Okay, what if the argument of the next book of Game of Thrones, or maybe the next book after that, but of the books to come, is that the real solution to the riddle is republicanism? And it's republicanism in a capital R sense. And he plunges into what made Rome great, what made the Roman Empire work, like maybe Critique of Rome and Celebration. Melissa is laughing off camera because she's been reading this stuff. We've been reading Appian and Sallust and some other great ancient Roman historians and authors talking politics. And there are a lot of bad things about ancient Rome. It's not all good news about Rome. It didn't just end badly. The brothers Gracchi, the main leitmotif of the next volume of Game of Thrones is the brothers Gracchi, and maybe the next volume of Game of Thrones is a carefully concealed critique of the Constitution of the United States of America for not being true to the legacy of the Roman Republic. Maybe that is the intellectual conclusion. Like, I'm not saying this to ridicule you, Valor. It's possible. It's possible. I am just saying, up to this point, if he has that interest, he has suppressed it incredibly effectively. He has completely concealed that from the audience, if that's where this is going. By contrast, the story about the squishers in there. Did you get that from his interest in Lovecraft's ideas as they come up in the squishers and the oily black rocks and the foundation of the temple. There are so many interests he have that are not concealed. Part of him wants to be writing something that's more like Lovecraft's cosmology, not even any specific story about Lovecraft, but this kind of, schlock horror rising from the depths of the ocean thing. That comes up again and again. So if he's really interested in Rome, he is suppressed, and the model of the Roman Republic, he has suppressed that far, far more effectively than he suppressed his numerous other thematic interests and creative impulses, which are frankly, pouring out all over the page pell-mell. As part of why the books go on for so many hundreds of pages. Yeah. So another real down-to-earth comment from Little Water, quote, "I lost hope in the next book to come out. His latest books were already getting stale." Well, yeah. So, okay, this is a good place to end. So a final comment from Do You Want to Give Me a Kiss says, quote, "My problem is that the hive mind cannot be a model for human happiness because it can never be a real human experience. So it doesn't tell me much about George R.R. Martin's model of happiness, if it even exists." So this, I totally disagree with you. The Catholic idea of heaven can never exist. The Catholic idea of the great chain of being can never exist. The Catholic idea of papal infallibility can never exist. All of these impossible things, nevertheless, were a model for society. They totally restructured and reformed and reordered society and produced the society of the Dark Ages, right? Intangible, impossible ideas are what political and social organization are all about. They're what political philosophy is all about. Plato's idea of the Republic is a totally impossible plan for society, laughably impossible. And by the way, Aristotle himself laughed at it. Like within his own time, it was laughed at. Okay, guess what? That can profoundly transform and reorganize society. And you can point to certain examples in history where it did to some extent, where people tried to live up to Plato's notion of the republic one way or another, where it did influence things. Now, I could go on and on with different cultural examples, around the world. Communism is a little bit too broad because there are many crazy ideas in communism. The philosophy of Mao Zedong, specifically, it's completely impossible. It's completely ridiculous. I don't want to digress into here iterating all of it, but this is like hot ice. This is like a square circle. This is wood and iron, and this is totally ridiculously impossible. Okay, impossible, intangible ideals, things that people have never experienced, things that people can barely think through in a coherent way. Those do become the model for society. They do transform society. And I think you could offer a really sincere critique of my philosophy, which is pro-democracy. I'm very much in favor of direct democracy to the greatest extent, kind of practicable. And I'm a critic of my own views, by the way. I'm not a naive Democrat. But, my arguments in favor of democracy, you could say the exact same thing. You could say direct democracy has never existed. Nobody has ever experienced it. How can direct democracy be a model for our society and politics? And it can't. I mean, I think when it comes to these things, the more intangible, the better. It's precisely through the understanding of the intangible, perfect model of democracy that you can work out all the details for the imperfect, tragic, deeply flawed democracy that you're actually going to get. In the same way that Catholic set of ideals produced and justified a Catholic society through the Dark Ages that in some ways resembled its ideals and in some ways was a parody of those ideals. It was a terrible, tragic letdown. So I just say I had a confrontation with one of my professors once that left him very stunned and impressed at my profundity. And this was in my very first year at university. And this was in my first few months at university. So I was a very young, stupid man, frankly. Young and ignorant and stupid. Anyway, the particular professor identified as an anarchist. But he was a very erudite, bookish sort of anarchist. He wasn't quite the stereotypical normal anarchist. And he was talking about idealism, both in philosophy and politics. And he said, look, I guess I could speak in the first person. He says, look, I'm opposed to this idea of perfection. I'm opposed to this idea that we need anything perfect, that we need anything ideal. And this was his example that he just, I don't know if he's possibly said it every year for 20 years teaching the same course. I don't know if he used it a million times or made it up with a spot. It's not that sophisticated an example, so he might have just made it up. So he said, I think that a group of imperfect men can come together with imperfect pieces of wood and imperfect hammers and imperfect nails, and they can build a boat. And it's an imperfect boat, but there's just no need to have any kind of ideal, have any kind of perfection, any kind of transcendental, perfect notion for people to come together and build a boat. And then by the same token, there's no need for any kind of ideal or perfect notion to build a society, to build there's no need for political ideals or a notion of whether that's a perfect Marxist society or a perfect democracy or what have you. And I put up my hand and said, what about the blueprint? And I think he said also that none of these things can be perfect. So I'm now here. I'm embellishing what he said quite a bit, I guess. But the boat can't be perfect, and the piece of wood, each individual piece of wood can't be perfect. There's no perfect. Okay. What about the blueprint? Right. There's a sense in which the blueprint can be perfect, and there's a sense in which it must be perfect. And if it's not, when you put the boat in the water, we're all going to die. And he really stood there and he put his hands on his chin. Oh, that the plan is perfect. And I said, yeah, that you have imperfect men with imperfect tools and imperfect pieces of wood. But either they're using a blueprint that's perfect or it's not. None of you will ever touch the blueprint. None of you, okay, there's a sense of what you will. None of you will touch the ideal ship, the notion of perfection described by the blueprint. You can't touch an idea. You can't touch an ideal. You'll never ride in a perfect ship. But yes, these intangible, abstract, idealized notions guide our actions as imperfect people in coming together, whether we be in our hundreds, in our thousands, or in our millions, to, build the ship that hopefully, when the rain falls, will keep us all afloat.